whole bio because that is in the folder on the left-hand side. I'm sorry, on the right-hand side, as is a copy of his slides. But I do want to say that Daryl Chubin has looked at issues of broadening participation in STEM education from a number of different perspectives. He's been at a university, he's been at professional society, he's been at federal government agencies, and he has also worked with a number of universities as he has worked with UNBC on a number of projects. And so he brings a very broad national perspective on these issues and has spent a lot of time thinking about what the numbers mean. And so we really appreciate that he has taken the time to share this with us. And if you look at his presentation, you'll see that it's very long, and he has provided us with rich data. And we apologize that we could not give him the several hours that it would take to do it justice. But I think that this is going to be the seeds for our discussions for the rest of the day, and probably for several years to come. So without further ado, I bring you Dr. Daryl Chubin.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Thank you, Janet. Thanks to former Dr. Rutledge and Dr. Tull, and of course to the Provost, whose words always move me, I must say. I'm very grateful for this invitation, not only to serve on the External Advisory Board, but also to participate in this workshop. And so thank you for being here. I appear, as Janet has mentioned, as, among other things, an alum of NSF, when in the late 90s the AGEP program was born. That's when I was there. I'm very much a fan of its design and what has become its national profile. However, programs can improve, which is the reason we are gathered here. We need to talk about the productivity of programs, the efficiency of programs, and just the savvy that we all gain by working on them. My remarks today are going to speak more to execution, not design. NSF always has a template, it has an idea of what it wants done. It awards money on a highly competitive basis, and then it says, go do your best stuff. And I can tell you from what I know about this program, it is trying very hard to do its best stuff. Question, however, is why an alliance? Alliances are tough. They may be easy to form, but they're very, very difficult to succeed. In particular, they face the challenge of converting participating institutions' strengths into collaborations that raise, in this case, PhD production, diversity, preparation for the professoriate, and a host of other things. What this program is about is really changing values as it changes lives. That's a very tall order. And of course, we turn to the faculty and the administrators to guide us through this. That's what I'm going to try to do today, is inform you a bit, provoke you a bit, because you're going to cover these issues later in much more manageable exchange format. The data you will notice from the slides, I'm very pleased that you made them available, derived from many sources. They illustrate nationally what some of you are living locally through PROMISE. They also ignore a lot that precedes the graduate segment of STEM, although it implicates a number of factors that precede that segment of the pathway. And of course, you'll notice that I've disaggregated as much as I possibly can, because that's where the nuance resides, is looking at the experiences that different groups have in different disciplines at different times. They're not having the same experience. I'm going to move rapidly. I'm going to go over here. And I may jump a little bit, but I won't obscure your view. I also will ask you if there's a point of clarification, interrupt me. Otherwise, I will consider this starting the conversation. For me, this is the problem thread that needs to be kept in mind in all these discussions. Who's participating, who's not? What are institutions of higher education doing? And how is the federal government helping or hindering? And you could, I suppose, add state government into this. As an outsider looking at the PROMISE program, I know there are 14 institutions, there are 8 AGEPs nationally, but I'm still learning about the intricacies of this program. And therefore, you need to filter what I am saying through what I would call your sphere of influence, your domain. You know more about your institutions and your departments, and therefore you need to act in a judicious way. I want to put some of the bad news up front. AAAS did a survey last year and had done one 5 years prior. Scientists today have a real sense of restiveness. I'm not going to call it despair. They think that their life is not as good as it used to be. And they see these challenges, which are particularly acute in research universities, to constitute the major concerns that they have. Just to remind you, here's about a 30-year run of the demographic characteristics of the STEM faculty. What struck me is that I completed my PhD at the origin year of this graph. And looking at that, we've had a doubling of all underrepresented groups and a tripling of women. And there's probably double counting them. Which means that in my lifetime, we have not achieved the kinds of goals that we all intended. And if we look at the breakdown of full professors over the last 25 years, you will notice that, and this is the intersection of gender and race and ethnicity, that even Asian men, you can say, have had gains, but we're still talking about less than 7% of the faculty. And everybody else is still hugging the baseline, which says to me that something's got to change in universities. Something has to change in our hiring and our reward system and all the things that ultimately provosts and presidents worry about.
These STEM faculty or all faculty?
That was, this is all faculty. Thank you for that. I keep jumping back and forth, and I apologize.
Well, it's kind of shocking that it's all faculty. I believe it for STEM, I'm shocked.
The American Institutes for Research in 2012 looked at the factors influencing time to completion. And you can notice in the bullets what has an effect of extending the time to the PhD. And then in the paragraph below, it just reminds us that underrepresented minorities are more likely to drop out. I don't like to talk about attrition. I like to talk about retention. because I believe that institutions, once they accept a student, have some obligation to help him or her complete, even though I understand that there may be there's a number of factors that are going to influence that. Council of Graduate Schools this year put out another PhD completion study. You may or may not be surprised that over a 10-year period, you only have a little over half of the students completing a doctorate. This varies greatly by field. In the broad field of the life sciences, you have completion rates of over 60%. In physical and math, you've got rates of under 50%. There's no difference in completion by gender. So there you have it, broad stroke. Some key findings from the AIR report, of last year. This is interesting because, again, it gets below the numbers, beneath the numbers, excuse me. Men are more likely to secure a position, and women are more likely to start in academia. Entry level is always deceiving because you've got to look 5 years out and see what's happened. And those lines cross very, very clearly. Women probably now on entry are making a little more money as well as men in first job. At the same time, men go to more prestigious institutions. And interestingly, if you are married and have a family, you're at a disadvantage regardless of your gender. This comes from, this is looking at chemists, women chemists. Gives you an idea of the flow of women in one STEM field. And what they experience when they, even though they start at roughly parity, going into graduate school. And another way of looking at this is the number of females per 100 males by field. And for the non-STEM people in the room, you may find this interesting. I would call your attention to the far right column and the numbers that are not in boldface. Physical sciences, 2-to-1. Math and computer sciences, 3-to-1. Engineering, 3-to-1. Male to female. And business, I don't know. You could probably tell me. Another way of thinking about this. You can disregard the left-hand side if you want, but you see by these fields, bachelor's to master's to doctorate. And the things that are the most interesting, I think, are these fields down at the bottom, which start low and stay low. In fact, they go lower. And some, like, there are probably slightly more women than men now completing a PhD in a life science. I think the reason you get this drop-off is that many of them are discouraged from going into research and go to medical school. Okay, shifting gears a bit. All of this is happening in a national context which faculty don't like to think about because they don't think they have any control over what they can do about, for example, affirmative action. How can a faculty member deal with constraints on recruitment and hiring? And that was really one of the questions that led me and AAAS to collaborate with AAU, which represents the top 56. 62 now? Okay, thank you, Chuck. 62 universities that gather the most federal R&D funds, and they produce the lion's shares of PhDs. we put out 2 handbooks which gave guidance to anybody in higher education on how they can make their programs legally defensible. How can you continue to offer programs that may be race conscious or gender conscious and not be sued? And this affects publics as well as private. To remind you that there are bans in these 9 states, which means they have to become especially inventive in order to deal with the constraint, which is considered a social force which is operating exactly opposite to the way those of us in this room would like the world to behave. It makes it more difficult. We have to justify our actions. We have to document everything we do. And here are the major cases. You know the Fisher case is going to be heard again by the Supreme Court. The likelihood of it favoring the Ms. Fisher is quite high. Wait, let me go back before I do that. You may have noticed that the University of California, Berkeley has 3% African Americans in its undergraduate student body. The state has 6%. And they have decided, as the flagship, although UCLA went through this a few years ago, to create a separate private scholarship foundation to bring more African Americans into Berkeley. That's their workaround. Even though Berkeley is a national institution, which means I'm not sure that the 6% in California means very much. But I think it's reached a point where they feel they need to do something. I don't know whether we consider this embarrassment or something else. A reminder is, although in public opinion polls have shown that people are opposed to affirmative action when it comes to employment or contracting or any other competitive areas, it is supportive of affirmative action when it comes to higher education, all except for Republicans. That's a nonpartisan observation. It's a slight disapproval. And it remains an open question as to whether all of those state bans, as well as what has happened at the national level, has depressed graduate enrollments. And this is one analysis which disaggregates by broad fields, which suggests there has been drop-off. What this never shows is that how long it takes after a ban is instituted to come back to where the enrollments were. We saw this in California in the 90s. It took them 10 years. 10 years, you'll notice in this talk, is a magic number. And I don't want you to forget, as you probably know better than I, how the composition of our graduate students has changed. So that at the doctoral level, you can see how non-permanent residents are dominant in our graduate programs and completing degrees. Now, whenever this is raised by somebody who says that this is going on to the detriment of underrepresented U.S. citizens, there is a big hullabaloo. I believe there is something to this. These are people who have been recruited from all over the world. They're the best of the best. They come with money in hand, and they can be put on research grants immediately. It has implications for what it costs to go to graduate school. So you have the deep blue is no debt. The light blue is debt of at least $30,000. So whatever policies we are subject to, it does have an effect on those completion rates, for one thing, and who decides to go on and who doesn't. and who decides not to continue. And this is an NIH graph going, what is this, 35 years? And the largest gain is in research grants, right here. The big blue block. Those have increased, those drive research productivity, and they support graduate students, including many of those non-permanent residents who come here from other places who are not eligible for other forms of federal support. You've been following perhaps what NIH has been discovering about its own award patterns. Well, here's another way of looking at it. You've got NIH awards on the left in the thousands going to white and Asian investigators, and in the hundreds going to underrepresented minorities. And this has been going on, this is from 96, is that what that says? So this trend has not changed too much.
What do you think is causing that, though?
What do I think is causing this?
Right.
Well, they're trying to find that out. They claim, that, I mean, the most telling part of the analysis that they've done so far has held every other factor constant and found that African American PIs get funded at a rate 10% less than everybody else, which would suggest that there's some systematic bias in the review process. I think one of the things that underlies this is that underrepresented minorities are very often employed at and submitting proposals from minority-serving institutions where they work. Minority-serving institutions are at a disadvantage in NIH R01 competition. These are large universities and medical schools who are winning most of those awards.
If we just got one, I'm pleased to say, University of Maryland, Central.
Yes.
We are a minority, but our PI is an Asian.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And how many have you applied, have you submitted lately?
One.
One.
And got it. So,
Good for you.
Yeah.
Good for you. Now if you can keep that going, right?
Yeah.
Postdocs. This is a real bugaboo for me, as the minions would suggest too. First of all, the postdoc status was intended to be a temporary status. And yet we have 70,000 postdocs. And that's probably an underestimate, by the way, because we call them different things. They have different titles on different campuses. They continue to grow. The idea was that you would augment your PhD skills with a year or two, and now you've got people who are going 5, 6, even 10 years in a postdoctoral position. It's a perversion of the system. It says there's something wrong. It says that we've created a workforce, but we don't have a market for utilizing all of their skills. You ask postdocs what their expectations are from 08 to 12, you can see that they're concerned about the obvious things. Advancement, career, funding, and their local employment. And it's not getting better. So there are people like Karen Kelsey who writes a blog and has written this book called The Professor is In. She is looking across fields. This is not just STEM. And she reminds us that the PhD, at least leading to a tenure-track job, is now statistically the alternative job pathway. Now, we're not supposed to talk about that here, but the idea is the following, is that there should be skills in your doctoral training which would prepare you for a number of pathways. Something that Chuck is going to actually talk about in his table. And let's not forget, why do we need a variety of skills? Because not everybody who has a PhD, which is defined as a research degree, is going to go into a research institution. He or she can go into other sectors of higher education and do very good work. And not producing a graduate student is not a negative. Rather, you can become a feeder for bright, well-prepared undergraduates who are going on to graduate school somewhere else. That's what we should bear in mind here. But Kelsey is giving some very straightforward advice on let's be realistic. So I'm asking you to be realistic. If you get to the academic workplace and you're a woman, you may encounter this. And there are several people in this room who can speak to this a lot better than I, so I'm moving on. But I will tell you that I spoke to a workshop of life sciences PhDs in 2013, and these are the things that came out. And I have to tell you that I was astounded by the first two bullets. I shouldn't have been, because I read some things, but they told stories that were really bothersome. And of course, the third bullet is accurate. I think a lawsuit will be coming sometime, but don't hold your breath. So, having been in this arena for as long as I have, I can tell you, number one, I've been very disillusioned with disciplines, which means that I've left several communities. Because I really believe these problems are not the sole province of any one discipline, and they need the collaboration of people who are trained in various places and in various methods and theories. That was one of the impetuses, if you will, for NIH awarding a grant to the National Research Council. I won't go into the whole thing, but we organized what ended up being a conference on understanding interventions that increase minority participation in research careers. That was the initial title. And from that, for a variety of reasons and in a variety of ways, we've been able to develop this as a community, a fledgling community of people who study interventions. We're not talking about evaluating programs, although there's a lot of that that goes on, but rather approaching intervention as a research problem and trying to explain why does something work or not. And we've had these conferences. The next one's going to be in Philadelphia in February. And maybe and you can go to the website and you can look up any of this. It's all there. Perhaps what's most important is what I consider to be a model at the state level. This is a national movement. But at the state level, you could think about a clearinghouse. This could be for all the institutions participating in PROMISE that includes literature, that facilitates communication through newsletters and blogs. The idea here is to make it easier for people to draw on the resources of other institutions and their colleagues who are located elsewhere. This is part of what it means to be an alliance. I picked out 3 constructs that have been addressed, I think, repeatedly and very effectively at the interventions conferences. You know all of these terms. These have all been studied empirically. We have people in this room who have contributed mightily. In fact, I have to say, UMBC has probably had the greatest sustained attendance at UI conferences of any institution, with Wisconsin and Northwestern on its heels. So we know, and this program is already studying the impacts of critical mass and self-efficacy and stereotype threat. because we know that these things affect individual behavior and persistence and success. So, if you're going to keep the promise, hope that's not too true. There are several things you need to do at the department level, because not everything happens at the institutional level. It happens in departments, which means you've got to examine your practices. I have to say that relative to the national scene, UMBC and Maryland College Park are nationally known for what they have done, and yet they also know how far they have yet to go. So it's not like they're climbing a steep hill. But by the same token, they have resources and lessons that I think need to be shared within the state that can be adapted to different institutional settings. At least in terms of graduate students, these are the kinds of things that need to be done. They need to be prepared. And you've probably heard this phrase, the T-shaped scientist. This replaces that old construction of we have hard scientists with soft skills. I can't stand that. No soft skills. These are all professional skills. And you need to think about this in terms of skills. What am I imparting to my students that's going to help them go to the next level? That's going to make them attractive in a competitive market, whether it's academic or non-academic. And while you are doing this, how you need to measure as you are going. So it's not enough to say you're doing something, you have to document what you're doing. You have to have somebody locally who is responsible for doing that, for pulling data out of the people who are participating in whatever way is important. Because you have to demonstrate that you're making a difference. That the intervention has led to different outcomes, a higher fraction of positive outcomes. And these are the kinds of things that need to be imparted. I only give this one example as a national model because, as I said, I think that Maryland is in better shape than a lot of other states. The Fisk-Vanderbilt model did the most important thing it did was this. It said the GRE is an impediment. It is not adding value. It's not giving us any information. All it's doing is it's keeping people out. And these are people we think can demonstrate their capability of going on for a PhD. And of course, what's lovely about this is it unites a minority-serving institution with a mainstream private institution. And note when this started. Again, we're 10 years out. In institutions like that, and in some of your institutions, I hope, the concept of holistic review, which has been applied at the undergraduate admissions office level, should also be utilized in the faculty hiring process. These are the kinds of questions that you can ask a prospective faculty member. Any candidate should be able to respond to these. And if you don't get answers that are reassuring, then I think that should be held against the candidate. This is only reflecting the student body that's here and that's going to be coming in even greater numbers. So some of this has to goes to the concept of cultural competence. Along with all the other things that you do to try to bring a new person onto the faculty. if you've done that, then it seems to me the institution has got to start measuring changes in faculty behavior. And for me, these 4 bullets summarize what institutions should be doing. They have to be rewarding the right things. They have to be showcasing people who are championing diversity as part of their professional performance. It's not either or. It's not add-on. Excellence means that you excel in your area, that you mentor, that you produce students, and that your reputation is boosted by all of that. Critical mass means more than 1, and of course that varies an awful lot by the size of the department. And the sooner you can bring undergraduates into a research situation, we know that about graduate students, the better it is. We know that. Study after study has shown that. I want to give you one example of what one discipline has done recently. They took this pledge. Yes, who knows what's going to happen? It is a national, visible, symbolic action, which is good. It's supposed to do that. Let's hope that they actually end up coming back and measuring this. Given that ASEE is involved, they will. I know that. But here's our magic number again. The message is, it takes 10 years to know. In 2003, I was part of a team that reviewed 126 intervention programs in STEM fields. We evaluated them using an NSF-like panel process. We ended up finding 3 exemplars and 5 promising programs. And by the way, UMBC, Meyerhoff was one of the exemplars. You can't tell in less than 10 years. It's very difficult because you're not funded for 10 years, which means that you as institutions and as an alliance have got to commit to collecting the data beyond the external sponsor's time frame. Here are some resources that I asked you to consult. I want to return in closing to something that the Provost mentioned. This is about mission, and it is about values. And all the other stuff, I think will fall into place. And I wish you luck in it. Very, very, very much my privilege to share this with you. Thank you.